6 months ago, I had a dizzy spell in my own kitchen and woke up in an emergency room with my niece crying in the hallway. Nobody ever sat me down and told me I was declining. Nobody had to. I watched the decision happen on their faces before a single word was said, and I understood, faster than I've understood almost anything in 41 years of baking, that looking a little lost was about to be more useful to me than looking sharp ever was again. If you've ever caught someone deciding who you are without asking you first, stay with me on this one and hit subscribe before we get to the part where she said it out loud, thinking I couldn't hear her. I've run this bakery since I was 25 years old, the year my mother handed me the ovens and told me the only thing she'd teach me twice was patience. Everything else, she said, I'd either learn by burning it or I wouldn't learn it at all. 465 degrees for the sourdough. 90 minutes of proof before the dough even thinks about doubling. 6:15 every single morning, whether my knees agree with the hour or not, and lately they rarely do. I know the recipes the way some people know their own children's birthdays. Not written down anywhere, just carried. Because writing them down always felt to me like admitting they could be lost. I never married. I came close once, in my 30s, to a good man who didn't understand why I couldn't take a Saturday off during wedding season, and I let that tell me everything I needed to know about which life I'd actually chosen. The bakery was the marriage. Corner lot, brick oven older than I am, a name over the door that's been there since 1962. My mother's name, not mine, because some things in this family were never supposed to be about any one person. 41 years teaches you things nobody can put in a manual. It teaches you that dough has a smell right before it's ready, something between yeast and rain, and that no timer on earth replaces knowing that smell in your own kitchen. It teaches you which customers are going to ask for their usual before they've even reached the counter, which ones will hover by the case pretending to decide when they've wanted the same cinnamon loaf every Thursday for 6 years. It teaches you, eventually, that running a small business in a small town means everyone in your family has an opinion about what you should do with it long before you're anywhere near ready to stop doing it yourself. My niece Paige started coming around about 3 years ago, not long after her own venture folded. A food truck. Gourmet grilled cheese, if you can believe that's a business model, that lasted 8 months before the fryer died, and, not long after, so did her interest in fixing it. She showed up one Tuesday morning saying she wanted to, quote, learn the business properly this time, and the whole family treated it like some kind of homecoming. The obvious heir, finally interested, finally settling down. Nobody seemed to notice that she never once showed up before 10 in the morning, and the bread is already finished by then. Every loaf already sold or cooling. 10 o'clock is when you sell what you made at 6. It isn't when you learn a single thing about how it got made. She'd stand at the register, cheerful, capable in the specific way that photographs well for a family group chat, and she never once put her hands in the dough long enough to know why the same recipe needs 4 extra minutes on a humid August afternoon. You can fake a great many things behind a bakery counter. You cannot fake knowing when something is ready before any timer tells you so. Then there's Marisol, 23 years old, granddaughter of Aunt Viv, who worked this exact oven beside my mother for 30 years before her hands finally gave out on her. Arthritis taking what decades of heat and flour never managed to. Marisol started sweeping floors here at 16 because her grandmother asked me to give the girls something useful to do after school, and she simply never left. She's the only person besides me who has ever pulled a loaf out of that oven early on, nothing but instinct, and been right about it every time. I never announced anything special about Marisol to anyone in the family. I just started, quietly, teaching her the parts I'd never taught another living soul. The parts my mother always said you only pass down once, and only to the person who is actually going to keep them. The dizzy spell itself wasn't much of a story, honestly, which is part of what still bothers me about everything that came after it. Low blood pressure, some dehydration, A long shift in July heat without nearly enough water in me. The doctor at the emergency room said as much, plainly, in about 90 seconds flat, and sent me home with instructions to drink more water and take it easy for a week. The whole visit, start to finish, cost less time than a single proof cycle on a cold morning. But my sister Renata was the one standing in that hallway when it happened, and Renata has never once in her life let a scare pass through her without turning it into a story she can retell. By the time the family had passed that story around twice at Sunday dinner, dehydration had quietly turned into, "We should probably keep an eye on her going forward," which became, within about 3 weeks, people finishing my sentences for me before I'd even finished having the thought myself, and reaching across the table to move the salt out of what they decided was my reach. Nobody ran a single test. Nobody asked a neurologist a single question. Nobody so much as called that emergency room back to ask what the 90-second diagnosis had actually said, word for word. It simply became true, the way things become true inside families sometimes, not through evidence, but through repetition, said often enough, by enough people, at enough dinners, until even I started to wonder on my worst nights whether they'd noticed something in me I hadn't noticed myself yet. I noticed the shift almost immediately, and it stung more than I expected it to. Paige started explaining things to me that I'd known before she was even born. The difference between bread flour and all-purpose, why we don't use the walk-in for the mixer, things I'd told her myself, word for word, the week before. She'd repeat instructions slowly, the way you'd explain something to a child, and I found, to my own genuine surprise, that I didn't correct her. I let a beat of silence pass before answering questions I knew the answer to instantly. I asked her to repeat herself once, sometimes twice, and watched her decide, right there in real time, that I was somewhere else entirely, some fog she didn't need to name out loud. It felt strange the first week, almost humiliating in a way I hadn't expected. By the second week, it felt like the only real privacy I'd had inside my own bakery in years, because a woman who might not be following the conversation is a woman nobody bothers lowering their voice around. The first real sign came on a Thursday, 11 weeks after the hospital. A man in a gray suit walked in 20 minutes before we opened, introduced by Paige as, quote, "someone from the county, just routine, nothing to worry about." Except, a county inspector does not ask about total square footage before he's even finished his first cup of coffee. He does not ask quietly, almost as an afterthought, whether the walk-in freezer is included in the sale price, and then catch himself half a second too late and correct it to the assessment. I was elbow deep in rye dough by the register that whole time, close enough to hear every single word of it, and I kept my eyes down and my hands moving, slow and steady, exactly the way you'd expect from someone who wasn't really tracking a conversation happening 4 feet away from her. I didn't say a thing that day. I didn't say a thing the following week either. When a real estate flyer, folded into careful quarters, fell out of Paige's bag while she was digging around for her keys, and she scooped it back up fast enough that I understood, immediately and completely, exactly how much she didn't want me to see it. What I did not know yet, and wouldn't know for another 11 days, was that the flyer wasn't really about ambition at all, or greed, or wanting something that had never belonged to her. It was about fear, real fear, the kind that makes people move fast and sloppy and careless with what they say out loud. But I didn't have that part of the picture yet. All I knew, standing there with flour on my hands, was that my niece was quietly measuring my bakery for a future it was never going to have, and doing it in whispers she'd fully convinced herself I was too far gone to catch. So I gave her more room. I let my performance get a little more generous, a little more convincing. I asked what day of the week it was, twice in one single afternoon, in front of Marisol, who looked at me with an expression I had to work very hard not to smile at. I forgot, theatrically, Carefully, deliberately, the name of a flower supplier I'd used for 18 straight years, and watched Paige exchange a look with my sister across the shop floor, a look that said, without a word, "See, I told you, it's getting worse, just like I said it would." I let small numbers slip right past me that I would normally have caught before they finished leaving someone's mouth. A vendor quietly overcharging us by $11 on a flour delivery. A schedule mix-up that cost the whole kitchen 40 minutes of prep time on a Saturday. I let all of it go, unremarked, unchallenged, and I watched, very closely, what my own family did with the space I was handing them. What they did, mostly, was talk. Freely, carelessly. The particular way people talk in front of furniture they've stopped noticing is furniture. Paige mentioned, on a Tuesday afternoon, to a friend on speakerphone while restocking the pastry case not 8 feet from where I stood kneading, a number $410,000. The appraised value of the property said in the exact tone you'd use for the score of a game you'd already privately decided you'd won. I kept sliding trays into the oven, steady, unhurried. I did not look up once. She mentioned, the following week, a name, Halloran, a developer who'd apparently been very patient and wanted a decision by the end of the month, one way or the other. I filed that name away the same way I file a proofing time in my head. Quietly. Exactly, without ever appearing to file anything at all. There was a Sunday dinner in the middle of all this that I still think about. My sister Renata made her pot roast, the same one she's made every third Sunday for as long as I can remember. And at some point during dessert she reached over and cut my slice of pie into smaller pieces for me, unasked, the way you'd do for someone whose hands you'd started to worry about. I let her do it. I said thank you, in a voice pitched slightly softer and slower than my own real voice, and I watched Paige watch that whole exchange with something that looked unmistakably like relief. Not concern. Relief. That was the moment I understood this wasn't really about medicine or memory at all for her. It was about permission. My decline, real or invented, was the permission slip she needed to stop feeling guilty about a decision she'd already made long before that dizzy spell ever happened. The morning it all finally came together, I was working a double batch of the sourdough my mother taught me, hands deep in dough that needed folding every 20 minutes for 2 full hours straight. The kind of repetitive, quiet task that looks, from across a busy kitchen, exactly like a woman on complete autopilot, thinking about nothing at all, present in body only. Paige was on the phone in the corner by the walk-in freezer, half turned away from me, voice low but nowhere near low enough, because she had stopped believing, weeks ago now, that I was listening to anything that happened in that kitchen anymore. I know, 12 days, she said, and I kept folding, slow and even. The loan against Mom's car comes due on the 23rd, and if I don't have the deposit wired by then, she's going to find out I took it out in the first place, and I cannot have that conversation with her. I genuinely cannot. A pause. Then, quieter, almost pleased with her own cleverness. By the time Aunt Viv notices anything's actually happening, it'll already be signed, and she won't even remember we talked about it in this kitchen. I did not stop folding the dough. I want to be honest about that part, because it would make for a better story if my hands had frozen mid-motion, if there'd been some dramatic cinematic pause right there in the moment. There wasn't one. I finished that fold, set the timer for the next, and felt something settle low in my chest that wasn't anger exactly. It was closer to relief, if I'm being truthful with you. I finally had the entire shape of it laid out in front of me, all at once. Not a greedy woman chasing an inheritance she felt entitled to. A woman drowning quietly in a debt she'd taken out against her own mother's car, 12 days from a due date she was terrified of, reaching for the one asset in this entire family, large enough to cover a hole she'd dug for herself and told absolutely no one about. It didn't make what she was doing right, but it made it something I could work with, instead of just something I had to sit there and survive. I let 3 more days pass before I said a single word about any of it, mostly because I wanted to be certain of every detail, and partly, I'll admit it plainly, because there is a very particular kind of pleasure in knowing something a whole room full of people firmly believes you are no longer capable of knowing. On the 4th day, a Sunday, with both Renata and Paige in the shop helping me close up for the night, I set down the bread knife I'd been using to portion the day's leftover loaves, looked directly at my niece for the first time in what felt like months, and said, in a voice I hadn't used with her since well before the hospital, 410,000. Halloran, the 23rd, your mother's car. The room went very still, the kind of stillness you can actually feel pressing against your ears. My sister's face did something I don't think I'll ever forget. Confusion first, quick and genuine, and then a slow, sick understanding as the math of it landed on her all at once, piece by piece. Paige didn't say a single word for almost a full minute, and I watched her move through every stage of realizing that the woman she'd spent 3 straight months talking around like a piece of furniture had heard every last thing. "You're not confused," Paige finally said, and it wasn't a question at all, it was an accusation, as though my clarity were somehow the crime here instead of her plan. "I never once told anyone I was," I answered back, calm and even. "I let you believe what you wanted to see. You're the one who decided what it meant." I didn't raise my voice at any point in that conversation. 41 years behind these ovens taught me long ago that the loudest person standing in a kitchen is almost never the one actually in control of it. I laid out the rest of it for her, calmly, piece by piece. The appraiser's visit with his wrong vocabulary, the real estate flyer folded into quarters, the entire phone call by the walk-in freezer, word for word. And I watched her slowly realize there was no single piece of this she could still argue was some kind of misunderstanding, because I hadn't guessed a single detail of it. I had simply been standing there in that kitchen the whole time, doing what I have always done best, which is noticing things at exactly the pace nobody in this family ever expects me to. What happened after wasn't loud, and it certainly wasn't clean. And if you're waiting for some big scene where Paige gets thrown out of the family in front of a crowd, that isn't what this story is, and it never was going to be. She didn't lose her family that night. She lost the thing she'd actually come here for, which turned out to be something entirely different, and in a lot of ways, harder to live with over time. My sister dealt with the loan on her own terms, quietly, the way families always deal with the parts of themselves they're ashamed of, and that particular conversation between the two of them was never mine to have, and it certainly isn't mine to tell you the details of now. Paige still comes to holidays. She sits a little further down the table than she used to, and she has never once, in all the months since, looked at me again the way she did in the weeks before that Sunday, like a door she'd already quietly assumed was unlocked for her. I called Marisol into the back office 2 days later and sat her down at the little desk my own mother used to do the books at every night after closing. I told her plainly and without any ceremony that she was going to learn everything now, starting with the parts one had never taught another living soul, because she was the only person who had ever earned them without once asking for them by name. What I hadn't told her yet, what I had actually been quietly deciding for almost 2 full years now, long before any dizzy spell, long before any flyer folded into careful quarters, was that this bakery was never going to Paige, and it was never really going to come down to a question of blood in the first place. It was always going to go to whoever showed up at 6:15 in the morning, whether their knees agreed with the hour or not, rain, shine, or heartbreak. People ask me sometimes if I feel any guilt at all about letting my own family believe something false about me for 3 months. I honestly don't, and here is the only way I know how to explain that to someone who has never once stood over a proofing bowl waiting for the exact right minute to act. Bread will lie to you, every time, if you rush it. It will look ready 20 full minutes too early. Puffed up, convincing, exactly the shape you're hoping so badly to see. And if you pull it then, out of impatience or wishful thinking, what you get underneath that pretty crust is something hollow, something that falls apart completely the second any real pressure hits it. You have to wait, always, for the version that's actually finished, not the version that's simply convenient for everyone standing around the oven. I let my family believe I was finished a little early. I wasn't. I was only ever waiting for the one moment that would actually tell me everything I needed to know, and I knew, the way I know an oven's true temperature without ever glancing at the dial, exactly when that moment had finally arrived. I'm still up most mornings at 6:15, same as I've been for 41 years now. Marisol is usually already there waiting when I unlock the front door these days, which still catches me off guard sometimes, in the very best way. She started keeping her own notes now, in a battered little notebook her grandmother gave her, and she still asks me first before she writes anything down, as if I might tell her not to bother. I never do. The corner lot is still ours, brick oven and all, name over the door exactly where it's been since 1962. Nobody's name is on any offer letter anymore, and Halloran, last I heard through the grapevine, moved on to a strip mall 2 towns over, which is, frankly, about the kindest ending anyone in this entire story actually got. If any part of what I just told you sounded a little too familiar, if you've ever had someone in your own life quietly decide, without ever once consulting you, exactly how much you're still capable of, I would genuinely like to hear about it, so leave it for me down in the comments and subscribe if you'd like more stories like this one. We're not finished here, not by a long shot. There's always another batch working away in the oven somewhere, and if there's one thing I've learned better than almost anyone I know, it's that the ones truly worth waiting for never announce themselves early. They simply show up, exactly on time, whether anyone happened to be watching for them or not.